Hi everyone, I'm your host Neha and you're tuned into Durian Dreaming, the show that brings you extraordinary stories from seemingly ordinary experiences in Indonesia's fast-paced market. Let's dive into today's conversation with another inspiring guest. Hi everyone. Today on Durian Dreaming, we are excited to welcome William Lumented. He's a president director for British American Tobacco Indonesia. He's widely recognized as one of Indonesia's top transformational leaders. In fact, he recently won an award of Indonesia's Best CEO 2024. William brings more than 2 decades of experience from the companies like Procter & Gamble, Friesland-Campina, Danone, L'Oreal, and Novartis. William mixes international savviness along with local insights, and he's reshaping what Indonesian business leadership should look like. So without further ado, let's welcome our guest, William Lumented, to Durian Dreaming Podcast. Hi, Will. Welcome to the podcast, Durian Dreaming. We're very excited to have you with us.
Hi, Neha.
Hi, Will. Well, you have had a very exciting career and a very enriching career. I mean, you have worked in some of the top global MNCs. And you've not only worked in them, it has also made you travel across the globe. I mean, if I look at the geographies that stretch from China to Morocco to France to Netherlands, and then somewhere in between Thailand. So tell me something, and all these countries have a very contrasting culture, So what's been the weirdest or let's say strangest work culture that you've had overseas as an Indonesian?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think I don't think there is such thing as weirdest or strangest culture to me. But I have to admit, when I was based in Morocco, I was in charge of not just Morocco. I was in charge of basically the entire French-speaking African countries. And in a way that it's quite contrasting here and there. It's like within Southeast Asia, sometimes people say like there's Southeast Asian culture, but it's not really the case. There are different countries within Southeast Asia. So it's the same thing in the context of French-speaking Africa. I was based in Morocco. I had to travel a lot. I had team all across in Algeria, in Morocco, in Senegal, in Ivory Coast, in Madagascar, in Mauritius, let alone some other countries that are so difficult to name because there are too many of them. And so in a way that there are two different cultures of North African and then the Sub-Saharan African. They're very different to the extent that they are almost clashing. So the weird moments were more I was sitting in the middle of culture clash between across countries or across the continents itself. I wouldn't say they are weird. The Northern African culture, they tend to be more Mediterranean. It's a bit of a mix of Arabic culture plus Mediterranean. So it's kind of like Southern Europe. People are more open, a lot more blunt. And then when it comes to expressing their thoughts, they give a lot of challenges. They ask questions and challenges so easily. Meanwhile, the Sub-Saharan African, if I compare them to Asians or Southeast Asians, they are more, at least in my experience, they are even more reserving the opinions, reserving the, not just the opinions, but also questions, quite a number of things that tend to seek guidance from people more senior or people more experienced. So that kind of culture was a clash. So I wouldn't say they are weird, but it's just that the context that I and my leadership team had to experience was the one that was strange and not easy to handle.
Well, tell me something. Now you're working with British American Tobacco, BAT. And you worked with Danone, you worked with Friesland-Campina, you worked with Procter & Gamble. So like I said, all the big companies. Now, usually all these MNCs have a very fast, direct, often blunt ways of working. Or let's just say transparent ways of working, which is very different to an Indonesian company. And it's usually a relationship first approach.
Yeah.
So how did you adapt to that shift or to that working culture? I wouldn't say shift, but to that working culture, given that you're from a country or where the approach is always about driving relationship first.
Mm. I think, interestingly, in some of this, American is very much less relationship, more direct, bluntness. But Europeans, surprisingly, have different ranges of being blunt as well as being relationship driven. Um, French culture, I would say, to be both relationship driven as well as being blunt.
Okay.
In a way that for people from Indonesia, like myself, or from Asia, in some contexts of European culture, they might actually find it pluggable. Like you can plug your style not so difficultly because you already are into building relationship before leveraging structures. And then I would say it's the difficulty to some people it was more like for to the one extreme of being very blunt, very straightforward, to the relationship building is all about how do you make use of the strengths or the experience of having had this relationship based culture in the in making things uh, happening more smoothly. So in a way that in a very blunt culture, relationship building ability will be an addition. Now, but for someone who has been kind of like experiencing more of the relationship based culture, for him or her to be able to overcome the blunt reaction from the peers, from the colleagues, or from the manager, something that anybody has to just learn and eventually think that there's nothing wrong about that. Positively, it gives you the reality without any sugarcoating and without any with full transparency rather than opacity.
So, having worked in all these global companies in different geographies and at the leadership positions, or what's one leadership style that you feel that more Indonesian companies could adopt?
Yeah, I think like as you rightly mentioned, the whole thing about being straightforward, no sugarcoating, um, very much robust in terms of structure and process are some of the things that Indonesian companies definitely can adopt. Many of them have started to adopt this, on the structure and processes. But the whole thing about, as you rightly mentioned, about being transparent, I wouldn't say blunt. I wouldn't think that any Indonesian company can go that far in terms of being blunt. But transparency without any sugarcoating, it's going to be a big enabler of faster decision-making process, um, better better information sharing as well. You don't have to guess. You really know the reality, you know the truth. And what is important is how can this be coming across earlier than later? Because that's some of the challenges, like to the extent that some of the Indonesian companies would try to enforce transparency, but transparency doesn't necessarily come early. When it comes late, then sometimes there are some associated costs to it, yeah, because decisions will be made later, not earlier.
Yeah. Okay. Now let's flip the script. So you mentioned about structures, about processes, which are good at global companies or MNCs, which local companies can adapt. What are the things? Because local companies are intuitive, they value loyalty amongst people, they're relationship first driven companies. So, what is something that Indonesian companies do better than multinationals and they don't get enough credit for?
Yeah, I think I would say flexibility is very hard. It's something that we really have to be proud of amongst Indonesian companies. The kind of flexibility that they have today. Now, of course, to the extent we talk about structure and processes, but on the other extreme, we talk about flexibility. Now, I guess combining the two together, while we still have structure and processes, but at the same time, reinforcing flexibility and entrepreneurialism is something that definitely a positive points about Indonesian companies. I have consistently seen that a lot of Indonesian companies are very entrepreneurial as well as flexible. So that's something that a lot of, I think we have heard a lot about this. Many multinational companies are dying to really embrace entrepreneurialism, but have not necessarily been successful in doing so across different patch of their work organization. So, and clearly, this is one plus point that can really be learned from Indonesian companies. Another one is, and relating to that, relating to flexibility and entrepreneurialism is risk-taking ability. The ability to take risks is just amazing. And in order to support that is the time frame of thinking. Now, quite a number of, MNC would be thinking in the time horizon of maximum 5 years. And, when we were in PNG, any brand launches, NPI would always be evaluated on NPV of 5 years, right? If probably you experience the same. Many local companies, actually, many local Indonesian companies think about this in a lot longer term perspective. And when things change over the course of whatever, within the 5 to 10 years, they stick to it. They stick to what they have decided and try to make it work. So these are the things that I think are just amazing from the Indonesian companies that many multinational companies can learn from.
Well, you've been driving some serious change or transformation at BAT. And if I'm not mistaken, you won a Best CEO award as well?
Yeah, that's 2000 for 2 years, 2023 and 2024.
Oh, wow. Congratulations on that front.
Thank you.
So since taking over BAT Indonesia, what's been your boldest change? Like how, in terms of transformation?
I think, there are quite a number of elements in the business itself. But the biggest driving factor behind the transformation, I would say, is the culture and the ways of working. The culture of accountability that I was with my leadership team was driving towards everyone in the organization. So accountability doesn't just sit at accountability and ownership are not sitting only with the leadership. So everyone, no matter what grade, what band you are, you would be accountable on something. And that's something that's not always easy to drive amongst Indonesians and in the context of driving an organization in Indonesia. So that is one. The second one is the ways of working. Typically any companies would be operating on, the typical usual business process drumbeat of monthly. And in the context of BAT Indonesia, we're doing it on a weekly basis.
Okay.
So imagine if, almost like, your sales and operating procedures, processes are driven on a weekly basis. On one side, it can actually feel tedious and taxing, but after some time, people see the benefits of getting to know things much early on and faster. Now, and then the whole thing about the whole transparency, was also something that needs to be brought into perspective, because without that, you don't get really the real understanding of what's going on. So those are the things that was the key driving factor, I would say.
Right. Will, I like how you touched upon ownership and accountability. And this strategy feels very forward-looking, something which I'm sure most startups have this culture, most tech companies have that culture. But BAT is close to what, 100-plus-year-old company?
Yeah, more than that.
More than that, right? So how did you get your team or your organization to adapt to these changes, transformation, and how did they react to it?
Yeah, I think it starts with walking the talk from the leadership team. That's number one. And reinforcing the whole openness and trust as a starting point. Over communication help. Over communication as in, from leaders to, to the team, likewise from the team to the leaders. I recommended, of course, the team to, we started with, quite a number of mailboxes whereby people can share opinion and thinking, whether anonymously or, by sharing their names, and then we're getting more and more feedback and concerns with, a full openness, which is good. It means like everyone wants to own this company in a way that they have a very high ownership on the success of BAT Indonesia as a company. So these are some of the things that I and my leadership team were kind of like, pushing and have made things happen.
Okay. Oh, very nice. Now, I know we discussed about how we're not going to touch upon AI, but I just asking an open-ended question. Feel free to chime in.
Mm.
There's a lot of buzz about AI,
Mm.
and we're not too sure how AI is helping companies transform certain processes, but there's a hidden fear that's going to replace a few jobs,
Mm.
and which is a big concern amongst the workforce here.
Mm.
What is your take on it? Do you think, firstly, so two questions. Firstly, how do you think AI would be helpful in a tobacco industry, if at all it would be? And do you really think it will end up replacing few jobs, or it's going to help humans become more better while using the AI, or the processes will become more sophisticated?
I think there are quite a number of AI initiatives that are still being cooked and work in progress, which unfortunately I can't really share when it comes to like, what is it that BAT is embracing or doing. But in my humble personal opinion, I don't think we should really worry about AI taking jobs easily, from the workforce of today. It will still take time now, but definitely I can improve productivity. In I mean, everyone knows like how much a lot of people actually have been using ChatGPT to just compose a simple letter or making a summary of something. So I mean, I'm not saying that that's really what we are doing. In BAT, but as I said, our AI practices as well as our AI initiatives are not to share. But I mean, I'm just talking, in general for the population. There shouldn't be any worry about AI taking over jobs. It's more about for the younger generation and for people in the workforce to really learn how to leverage AI for at least productivity, if not like for something even more than that.
Right, but good to hear that the tobacco industry is also embracing AI, and there are a lot of initiatives in pipeline, like you mentioned.
Yeah.
And also good to hear that it's not going to replace the jobs, but maybe, like you said, just make them more better in terms of the output.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Now, I read, Will, somewhere that BAT's global goal is 50% revenue from non-combustibles.
Yeah.
You hear a lot about vapes, e-cigarettes, etc., etc. But Indonesia is still very traditional in terms of smoking culture. And smokeless tobacco is a big play in BAT globally. But Indonesia is somewhere far behind that thought also, to embrace that. So how are you preparing Indonesia for that future?
I think when it comes to smokeless product, as to some extent people are aware already that we do have smokeless products in Indonesia, which is a closed system vapor product. Indonesians are slowly converting into smokeless products already, and hence we have anticipated that by providing this product since sometime February 2023. It's available in the market and people can just purchase it. Globally, yes, there is a trend to move more and more towards smokeless product, and BAT is anticipating that. It's also part of the overall purpose of BAT of creating a better tomorrow. This is one of our purpose when more and more consumers also are shifting towards a smokeless product. But when it comes to Indonesia, it's shifting, but the shifting, yes, I have to admit, it happens at relatively slower pace, but it does happen.
Okay. Because behavioral change is never easy. And in large organizations, it's often more difficult. So while you have put out the product, like you said, since 2023 Feb, smokeless products. So what was difficult? To convince the larger population outside, or smokers, or to first internally convince the people within the organization? Which change was faster?
Between you and me, a lot of people in BAT actually have fully understood the differences between smokeless and conventional products, and hence have shifted. I would say it's not too much of a big task to understand the differences between the smokeless and conventional.
Well, you have recently been awarded or have scored better on your voice inclusion survey.
Yes.
Talked about inclusivity at workplace.
Yeah.
Right? Now, there are a couple of preconceived notions about this industry. First, it is
Yeah.
people feel there's a barrier for women to enter this industry for work.
Yeah.
So how do you break that barrier? How do you make sure women are more welcome? How do you encourage them internally within your organization to be at the leadership positions? Because, they are underrepresented in at the top, especially industries like tobacco, which seem to be different in BAT. Now, you are a leader which every Indonesian would look up to, having such an enriching career and traveled across.
Yeah.
So what are you doing to shape the next generation of Indonesian leaders?
Yeah, the first part when it comes to women in tobacco, compared to when I joined the company sometime in July 2022, we definitely have progressed so much, so much more than where we were in 2022. We have definitely more women in management. More than 30% of managerial roles are occupied by women. And then on the senior leadership team, it's the same thing. More than 30%, close to 40% of our senior leaders in Indonesia, senior positions in Indonesia, are occupied by women. So, which means what's happening to the extent probably outside BAT in tobacco industry is not the same. It's not necessarily what we're going through. As I said, diversity and inclusion are very important for BAT in Indonesia, for sustainability of the business as well as the organization, for the diversity of thoughts, as well as diversity of ideas that would be brought by these different types of talents that we have. Now, how we're going to, what we have done is, again, we really like to put this as a part of an integral part of people agenda. So it's not just something that we say, but we really create quite a number of things when it comes to hiring, developing, promoting, as well as exporting overall talents from Indonesia, as well as especially female talents. But probably to give a bit of a extra nuance, tobacco is very much a very male-dominated industry, because most of the users are pretty much male consumers. And then historically, I guess it's not just in Indonesia, it's very much occupied by men. It's a very manly kind of industry. But this is just kind of like a myth, I would say, by portraying that at the end of the day, it's all about it's just like any other FMCG company, with, of course, a little bit more restriction, because the category is restricted. It doesn't mean women cannot thrill or cannot survive. So by really like sharing to candidates or talent pool that this is an important initiative, as well as women not just can come and survive, but can even thrive. These are some of the initiatives that we have been doing so far, internally as well as externally.
Okay, because there are companies and within the tobacco industry also, which are not following the same inclusivity meter, and you will not see many women in those industry. So I'd like to dwell a bit more on it. Would you be able to share an example? Because you talked about somewhere diversity of thoughts.
Mm.
Would there be any example where you can say, because we have women in BAT and this problem was better addressed or looked at a different lens because of that diversity?
I would say I give myself even as an example. When I was working in L'Oreal, being really in a very cosmetic industry, which is very kind of like female centric, quite a number of my views are very objective, because I'm completely disconnected from the category or the brand, right? Because I'm to some extent I'm not necessarily using them.
Yeah.
And that gives value to the company, because then everything will be evaluated without any bias. I mean, this is the simplest example that I wanted to bring on the table. And some of the opinions or the discussion can be much more objective without any bias of any consumer bias or any product bias. That's the simplest way to put it that way. And then, of course, the diversity of thoughts is not just coming from, whether you're female or male, but also from external background. People coming from outside tobacco, like myself, are bringing to the table different ways of looking at the business. For many, because typically a lot of people who are working in the tobacco industry, not just on their men, but they've been with tobacco their entire life. That's typically the case, not just in Indonesia, but globally. But BAT is really embracing the whole diversity and inclusiveness to the level of not just like about gender, but also about background, about ways of working, style, mindset, culture, everything beyond gender.
Right. Now, Will, you have tasted leadership around the world, right?
Yeah.
So before we close this conversation, I have a fun question. If leadership were a flavor, what would Indonesian leadership style taste like?
Well, this is more for, I don't know, like, whether any foreigners would understand this. I would use the analogy of a food, because you're asking me a flavor and tasting. There is this a food called sayur asam. It's kind of like Javanese, Sundanese. Sayur asam, well, asam means basically sour, but actually the taste of that particular, it's a soup. It's a soup with many things inside. So the flavor of that, you can't say whether it's actually sweet or sour or spicy. It's actually a combination of all the three of this.
Okay.
It's a fusion. It's a fusion of all the taste, amazing taste of sweet, sour, and spicy. So Indonesian culture would be, number one, collaboration. Second, it's about being hands-on. Understand what's going on, like a very high can-do attitude that is kind of like shown by quite a number of Indonesian leaders. I mean, if you talk to any Indonesian leaders in local companies, you would understand the way they understand the details is amazing. And at least this is my experience, which is then the number two, positivity, which is hands-on. The spiciness is probably about hierarchy.
Okay.
So it's both positive and negative, in a way that positive because there's a lot of respect. The not so good part about hierarchy driven is that, you will tend to seek advice from the elders or the leaders before making decisions. So you will always need a bit of a rubber stamp for everything, that Indonesian leadership.
Thank you. I mean, this is a very tasty description of Indonesian leadership. And if I could sum it up, it's more like sayur asam. So a combination of spice, tanginess, and sweetness. Thank you so much, Will, for a very candid conversation, for giving us insights into what it takes, especially for women, to survive and thrive in the tobacco industry, and what BAT is doing to make a difference in that field. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, Neha.
And that's a wrap for this episode of Durian Dreaming. I hope today's discussion sparked some new ideas for you. Don't forget to subscribe, share your thoughts, and stay tuned for more exciting stories. Until next time, keep dreaming big.